It all started with a piece of scrap metal, just forgotten in an abandoned clinic. But inside was this strange, glowing blue powder. And that powder would unleash one of the worst radiological disasters in history. Not from some big reactor meltdown, but right in the backyards and living rooms of an ordinary city in Brazil.
So let's set the scene. We're in a regular city, Goiânia, Brazil. The year is 1987. And as you can see from this document, everything seems normal. But a hidden danger, one that was both beautiful and silent, was about to be dug up.
This right here, this is the image at the very heart of the tragedy. A mysterious, almost magical blue glow. I mean, it was beautiful, it was captivating, and people were drawn to it like moths to a flame. A fatal, radioactive flame.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to look at how this Pandora's box was opened in the first place. Then we'll see how its deadly content spread through a whole community. We'll cover the desperate race to save the victims, and finally, the toxic legacy that's going to last for centuries.
You know, the craziest thing is, this catastrophe didn't start with some huge explosion. It started with simple neglect, with something incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous just being left behind. So here's how it all went down. For 2 whole years, a powerful radiation source from a therapy machine just sat there, forgotten. Then, in September of '87, 2 guys looking for scrap metal found it. They had no idea what it was, just said it was heavy and probably worth something. They sold it to a local junkyard, and the owner, curious about what was inside this heavy piece of lead, decided to pry it open. And in that one moment, he unleashed a curse upon his entire city.
So what was this stuff? It was cesium-137 chloride. And what that really means is it's a salt-like powder, a byproduct of nuclear fission. It pumps out powerful gamma radiation, and with a half-life of 30 years, its danger doesn't fade away quickly. This was the invisible poison that was now loose in Goiânia.
And this is where the story turns into a real human tragedy. Because the junkyard owner, he wasn't scared by this strange powder, he was mesmerized.
He actually took pieces of this glowing source material into his house to show his family and friends the magical blue light. He even gave away fragments of it as gifts. His 6-year-old niece, a little girl named Lida das Neves, was so enchanted she rubbed the glittery powder all over her body, thinking it was carnival makeup.
So you can see how the contamination just spread invisibly. Kids like Leigh Bridie, absolutely delighted by what they thought was carnival glitter, rubbed it all over their skin. The poison became part of their homes. It was on their clothes, in their food, on their bodies, just passed from hand to hand.
Pretty soon, people started getting really sick. We're talking vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness. They went to doctors, but nobody could figure out what was wrong. So for almost 3 weeks, as this powder continued to spread, the city was in the grip of a silent, deadly epidemic that nobody could name.
By the time the authorities finally realized they were dealing with a radiological incident, the damage was already done. All because of that shared fascination with a beautiful blue glow, 249 people showed significant levels of internal contamination. A whole community had been poisoned. And the consequences were immediate and absolutely tragic. The radiation exposure was so intense for some that 4 people would die within the first month. That included 6-year-old Lady das Neves. This was the grim reality facing doctors as they started a desperate race to save everyone else.
So, once the cause was finally known, a frantic medical response kicked into gear. I mean, how do you fight a poison that has literally become part of a person's cells? The whole effort was just massive. Doctors had to quickly triage all the victims, figuring out who had the highest, most life-threatening internal doses. They identified 46 people who needed immediate, aggressive treatment right away. The main weapon they had in this fight was a compound called Prussian blue. Now, it's not some miracle cure, but it works in a really clever way. It essentially acts like a chemical magnet. It grabs onto the cesium-137 particles in your digestive system and flushes them out of the body, stopping them from getting reabsorbed and doing even more damage. And this table right here shows you just how incredibly effective that treatment was. See that column biological half-life? That's how long it takes the body to get rid of half the radioactive material. For an untreated adult, it's 80 days, but with Prussian blue, it drops to just 26. You can see this massive reduction for everyone, no matter their age. The bottom line is the treatment worked. It drastically cut down the time this poison stayed in people's bodies, reducing that biological half-life by almost 70% in adults. For a lot of the most heavily contaminated victims, this treatment was literally the difference between life and death.
So while doctors were fighting to save individual lives, the authorities were facing a completely different battle: what to do about a contaminated city. The medical crisis was really just the beginning of an environmental problem that would be enormous and incredibly long-lasting.
That cesium powder was everywhere. 7 houses had to be completely demolished. Topsoil was scraped away from the ground. People's personal belongings, photos, clothes, furniture, all of it had to be treated as radioactive waste. The cleanup was just a monumental task.
And the sheer scale of the aftermath is just staggering. The cleanup generated 3,500 cubic meters of radioactive waste. That's enough to fill more than an Olympic-sized swimming pool with contaminated soil, concrete, and just people's memories.
So what do you do with all of that toxic material? It had to go somewhere safe. The solution was to build 2 permanent repositories on the outskirts of the city, basically entombing all that waste in these massive concrete structures designed to keep the radiation locked away forever.
And this is the part that just blows my mind. How long does that tomb have to stay sealed? The safety assessment for the repository was designed for a period of 600 years. That's 20 generations. The consequences of just a few weeks in 1987 will echo all the way into the 26th century.
Now, if there's any good news, it's that science is working to make sure this disaster stays contained. Current models predict that those concrete repositories will hold, and they'll prevent the cesium-137 from ever reaching the groundwater and causing harm ever again.
The story of Goiania is just a heartbreaking warning about what happens when we lose track of the powerful things we create. That radiation source was abandoned for just 2 years. It really makes you wonder, what other dangers are just sitting out there in forgotten corners of the world waiting to be found?